2026 Global Outlook casts the Philippines as a disappointing growth story, weighed by what it calls a costly corruption crackdown. But it also says the Philippines is one of the few emerging markets with room for more rate cuts. With us now for more, visiting Manila this week, Singapore-based Euben Paracuelles, the chief ASEAN Economist at Nomura. It's good to see you in person again, Euben. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
All right,
happy to be here.
Happy New Year. What do you
Happy
make
New Year.
of the peso's recovery there?
Yeah, I think it's spotty on expectations that the BSP will come in and try and smooth things over. They've got the reserves to be able to do that. And yeah, we know they've already said that they're not targeting certain levels, but when the moves are too exaggerated, that's a chance for them to come in and reduce the volatility a little bit. So not surprising in that respect.
Laissez-faire, as you mentioned, in the way that the governor had phrased it, not really putting a target to the peso, but if indeed there hadn't been any sort of smoothening operations, do you think the peso could have fallen a lot more?
I think there could be a lot more pressure. Again, we haven't seen, after the remittances inflows in the seasonal period of December, the source of dollars are probably easing a little bit now, and we don't see much inflows because I think, based on my conversation with foreign investors, inflows are also lacking because of a negative sentiment on the back of the corruption scandal. So I think there's some reason to believe that there could be more pressures, and this is why I think BSP is on guard.
So do you think the peso's weakness could help or hinder the catch-up strategy of the government this year?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's really the main consideration for them. I think the main thing is really the growth outlook in the near term, because I think it's really struggling. If you look at government spending, latest data is of November, it's really contracted by even more compared to the previous quarter. So growth is going to be moderating by quite a bit, and so I think they need to try and figure out how to reverse that by bringing back spending.
Well, let's put that into context, because Nomura's Global Macro Outlook for 2026, published December 11th, really has a bullish global story, except for two in the ASEAN, and in particular, disappointing growth in Thailand and the Philippines, both hobbled by domestic challenges. If you were to choose between the two, which possibly could disappoint a lot more because of domestic challenges?
Yeah, so I think the country that faces more downside risk is actually Thailand, because they have both structural and cyclical factors that's affecting economic performance. So aging and the lack of competitiveness and pressures from China. And then you've got the political uncertainty. There will be elections again. We don't know if this is going to resolve the problems that they've had in the last decade or so. In the Philippines, I think it's a little bit more temporary in that sense, because fiscal spending is down, but we know in previous episodes of a similar type of corruption controversy, the government tends to find ways to implement catch-up spending plans, which I expect to happen maybe in the second half of the year. So that should turn things around. And I think also this is an opportunity to really implement reforms for budget transparency and improving governance to try and prevent this from happening again in the future.
Well, I'm happy to learn that it's Thailand, not the Philippines. But then when I read your report, the way that you phrase it is quite concerning, because you labeled the Philippine chapter as the costly corruption crackdown. And the inadvertent fiscal tightening is substantial, hurting growth materially through the first half this year. Could you walk us through the reason why you phrased it this way? The language that came with it seemed a lot more depressing.
Yeah, so I guess you can think of it from the near-term perspective. So I'm just looking at maybe in the next couple of quarters that growth will be really subpar.
Would that be two? At least two?
At least 2 quarters from
here. So there
here.
could be more.
Yeah, and beyond that, we'll have to see, because it's still quite uncertain. It really depends on how much they can implement on the catch-up spending plans. Again, the starting point for last year was actually pretty optimistic. We had growth relatively okay. And then when this controversy hit, growth was really affected very significantly over a very short period of time. And we know this could persist for a while, just again, based on past episodes. So yeah, in that sense, yeah, it is negative because, you know, one of the key bright spots in the Philippines was the economy being able to grow 6%. And faster than ASEAN peers, maybe except Vietnam. That was a post-COVID recovery. But then now, just from this controversy, growth is now potentially below 4% in the second half of last year.
And it's quite concerning when you take a look at the output gap because that has widened.
Yeah.
And when you compare that with the pre-scandal,
Yeah.
it's a sort of a concern when you look at jobs
Yeah.
and capacity.
Yeah.
So how much of a risk is that then?
Yeah, it is a major risk, and I think there's still quite a bit of uncertainty. So for me, the balance of risk could still be tilted to the downside. And as you say, the output gap was already quite negative, or a small negative before the scandal, and because of the drop in government spending, the gap has widened a lot. So yeah, there is subpar growth, I think, at least for the next couple of quarters.
You made a mention of previous fiscal underspends because of similar scandals in 2011. You've
Yeah.
studied that. You've
Yeah.
also studied the one in 2023. What makes you say that this is just going to last a couple of quarters, that it couldn't be a lot worse than what you've already seen?
Yeah. I'm not sure if this is actually going to last just for 2 quarters. I'm saying just based on those episodes, there will be at least a couple of quarters where underspending will be persistent. But beyond that, again, it will depend on a lot of these factors. That's why there's still a little bit of uncertainty. But again, I think it's reasonable to expect that the government is clear in its agenda to try and provide catch-up and prevent growth from weakening further. So I think that's potentially happening in the second half of 2026.
Well, let's put some numbers to your narrative because we've tracked how you've seen the economy just slow from last year. If we can just pull up the graph. You're tipping for 4.7% GDP for all of 2025, even with a low base. So that pretty much turns out fourth quarter coming in at 3.9%.
Yep.
So that's sub 4% growth. And you've also cut 2026 GDP forecasts from 5.6
Yep.
to 5.3
Yeah.
in such short span. I mean, why this decision to
Yeah.
choose the lower path?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is really concerning you?
Yeah. So again, it's the direct impact from the fiscal contraction, the
Still.
drop in spending. That's the direct part. But the indirect component is what we call the spillover effects. So we've seen that earlier in the Q3 number when the scandal broke and consumption actually slowed a lot more. So I think that's something that you'd expect in this kind of anti-corruption drive. So we've seen that in the past, not just in the Philippines, but across other countries as well. And I think going forward, these spillover effects will also expand. So from household spending, it could affect business investments as well, because obviously there's quite a bit of uncertainty, there's negative sentiment, the central bank keeps talking about it. So if the drag is now sort of becoming more broad-based, not just the drop in government spending, so you'll see growth coming potentially below 4%, at least in the near term.
So what's it like for maybe a typical household? What's the feeling going to be like? The fear of waking up without a job or unable to pay rent or maybe even pay the next grocery?
Yeah.
If household spend isn't, working out and businesses aren't investing.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the uncertainty, the economy is slowing down, and typically when inflation is actually quite low and it's been very benign, that tends to support household spending. But it's not the case this time because of all these negative headlines that you're seeing. That tends to depress household sentiment as well. And in addition to that, we have a global backdrop which is very, very uncertain, and headlines nowadays are kind of easy to see from social media and propagate in those other channels. So I think sentiment-wise, it's becoming more and more negative.
And not to forget the large twin deficits that you've also cited in your report, the fiscal deficit narrowing only slightly, 5.1% of GDP, and also the large current account deficit staying near 3.7. I mean, that's still huge pre-COVID standards. So how close is that going to become a problem then? Is it going to be a funding problem
Yeah.
or a ratings issue?
Yeah. So on the twin deficits, it's actually, I would have thought it was becoming a bit more of an issue before the scandal, because we know there's quite a bit of importation that's happening on the back of the infrastructure spending. Capital goods imports were rising, et cetera. So, but then now that factor is less of an issue because there's less government spending. So I think the narrowing of the twin deficits will come in the near term. But whether the improvement is enough for ratings agencies, for example, to provide an upgrade or think about an upgrade, I think it's not really the case yet. So S&P is a good example. They had the rating outlook on positive. But then in November, 12 months down the road, they said, we'll keep it positive, but they did not upgrade. So I think that's partly because of them being held back by the uncertainty of the corruption scandal and the growth outlook being negatively affected. So the key for me is 12 months from here, when they need to decide on whether they need to upgrade the Philippines. I think it's still quite uncertain. If at that point there will be some resolution to the corruption scandal, they could potentially upgrade the Philippines to A-, right? But on the other hand, if there's still no clarity, they could potentially, the risk I see is from positive, we go back to stable.
All right. Well, so many ifs still, but thank you so much for the context.
Thanks,
Really
Jen.
appreciate it,
Yeah,
and safe travels back to Singapore.
Yeah.
Euben Paracuelles of Nomura joining us here.